Okay, now I want to go a little bit forward at that time to tell you about another major ancient Native American habitation. It was at Marineland. Now, it was documented by an amateur archaeologist named Douglas. Now, what Douglas did was he came through the state of Florida along the coastline. You got to remember, Florida was not an easy place to get around. There wasn't that kind of mobility, obviously. Unless you came by water, and there were just very few roads. They weren't in good shape. There wasn't really a government that had resources that created enhanced mobility, and we still don't have that. So I guess it's a continual struggle. But I want to tell you the significance of what he found. He did the whole east coast of Florida, the whole east coast, the entirety of it. The most significant evidence of habitation that he found was at Marineland. And this is how he described it. He has a journal. I'm not going to quote here. But the way he described it is he came upon it, and it was a huge rise in the land. Huge rise. It's no longer that way. In his book, he estimated that he thought it was about 15 to 20 feet up from the shore. And the height of this extended for a mile. For a mile. He climbed up, and of course it was midden material. It was all midden material. We're not talking about sand dunes. This was stuff that was deposited. It wasn't native soil, if you understand what I mean by that. So he got up, and what he found was that this was a habitation site where the encampments were catacombed into this structure. So that when you got to the top, you would walk and you would find an encampment and you would walk down to it. Now, I don't think Mr. Douglas talked about this in his work. I can't recall. But during those times, Florida was much cooler, colder, drier. And so, imagine this, if you're a Native American and you don't have all the modern conveniences that we have, and you needed shelter, and a nor'easter was blowing through a really bad storm, or really cold, you could build your fire in there. Plus, imagine this, you could defend your place, you could watch people approaching, and you could defend it. So it was defensible space. So, why'd they pick Marineland? Why would this very large group of people pick something that was a mile long and went to the river? It went to the river. Why? Because there was a very large freshwater source in Marineland. And of course, that's what you need. You can't live and create a community without it. So, why doesn't it look that way today? Because through the ages, and as I go through this history, I'll tell you what happened to that rock pile, that midden pile. It was mined. It was used. Some of it's at Bing's. It was used for the foundation. Some of the oysters were burned, and the lime was used to mortar things. Well, likewise, everywhere else. And it was used by the road department for the roads and highways. So they continued to mine from it. But I want to tell you, it was such an important site along. This to me really tells a lot about its significance. It was such a prominent site on the east coast of Florida that the King of Spain declared it a crime to remove anything from it because it became an important navigational marker. Ships would know when they saw it that they could tack in. You know what else is out there? And some of you may know about this. And there are some natural boils, natural freshwater boils in the ocean. And and I couldn't tell you if where they are today is where they were then. I have no idea. But off of Crescent Beach, there is a freshwater boil. It's actually 2 vents. We call them vents. And I'm trying to think about how far offshore, maybe a mile. And it bubbles up. It roils up. You get to it. You know it's different. It's sulfur. which is the freshwater marker. And you'll see a lot of, sea turtles in it, and wildlife in it, a lot of fish in it, because I guess it's interesting to them. It's cool. You dive into it, it's much cooler than the surrounding water. But they're huge vents, and the National Geographic Survey has done a lot of work there to document that. So that's why marine land, because of fresh water, because of its prominence. Of course, it still has a sort of a different kind of prominence today. But so that's what was there. Now, everything that I'm describing up to the time of the King of Spain, Native Americans, that's all there were. And then came our role in becoming a pawn in international, global competition that was dirty, bloody, bad. And that was that we were caught up in the tremendous hatred between the King of Spain and France. Because it goes to religion. France, they became Calvinists. They were no longer Catholics. The Spanish were Catholics. And it was absolutely a mortal sin to have renounced the Catholic faith. And so there was war between them. And that war played out here in Florida. The French came here first to settle. I don't know if you all know that. They were settled at Fort Caroline, which is up in the Jacksonville area. The King of Spain heard about, what do you mean they're there? So he dispatched, and they did it by commissions, So the Spanish came, and not to have to dwell a lot on that story, but all of you know, the word Matanzas means bloody massacre. And the Spanish came here, got off around the area of St. Augustine. They knew they were in Fort Caroline, and they went by land to capture the fort. But at that time, the French, the large portion of the garrison, went out into the sea to come and attack the Spanish at St. Augustine. The Spanish went out to sea, so it's like a two-pronged attack going this way, and a hurricane, a Florida hurricane, came and blew that plan all to heck. The result was that the French, they all washed ashore south of here. And so now they were trying to go back to Fort Caroline. Well, the Spanish, they also got wrecked up and whatever, but they were there. Well, now they're coming to fight the French. And it was at the inlet that the French were stopped. And by the way, you know who warned the Spanish that the French were coming up? The Timucuan Indians in the area. Those were the Native Americans in the area. So then the Spanish said, "Okay, we'll cross you over." And if they did not pledge their Roman Catholic faith, they were slaughtered. And all but a few French, including probably the smartest guy, was a musician. I want to live and make people happy and enjoy. So very few of the Spanish were spared the blade. And it was called, Matanzas, to commemorate that terrible event. And they were killed in the dunes. Now, that event was seminal to Florida. It made Florida Spanish. And I want you to think about this. Not many people realize this. This area has been under Spanish dominion longer, way much longer, than it has been under the dominion of the United States of America. I want you to think about that. Now, the Spanish came, and of course it was a royal prerogative. They did not want this to fall into the hands of the Calvinists. There really wasn't anything here. You couldn't, it was too hard to create industry, it was hard to get around. Can you imagine how tough this wilderness was? So, the Spanish kind of enslaved the Timucuans. Now, when they met the Timucuans, these are very, very interesting people. We know a lot about this history because there was a Frenchman, and I don't know how this Frenchman got engaged to work for the Spanish on this particular expedition. I haven't figured that out. I am going to try to figure it out. His name is Jacques Lemoyne, M-O-Y-N-E, and he was an artist. And he drew the Timucuans. So we have this incredibly rich archive of these folks. And he drew them with the Spanish. And the one thing that is consistent throughout all of his drawings were that the Timucuans towered over the Spanish.